Hello, everybody, and welcome. Now, how would I say? What did I say? I don't say welcome, do I? When's the last time we did an intro?
You see, you've been spoiled by the Swiss chalet. That's the problem.
Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always. And this time, for the first time in 2023, the ever wonderful Mr. Jason Johnston Yellen. Hey, Jason.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to lead us into, for the very first time, I'm coming to you all live from the newly opened garden office.
Yeah, well, I didn't want it to all be about you, you know?
Yeah, start with the most important, work your way down.
Yeah, it was 2023. Well, you know what? This is a fresh beginning for you, isn't it? Is this like a clean slate for you, Jason?
Yes. I've left my family home. I have moved to the bottom of the garden. I have everything I could ever wish for in my garden office except for a toilet.
Oh, man.
But I have had conversations with my local FedEx guy, and he has given me ideas.
Have you considered just cutting a hole in the wall, like a butt-shaped hole?
I don't see any glory in that. To be honest, I thought you were going to go with a hole in the floor. That's where I thought you were taking that. I didn't think about a butt-shaped hole in the wall.
Well, I think back to when my dad for a while, before he quit his work in chemistry and became a trucker, he decided to give up his apartment and buy a boat, and he lived down a boat, 25-footer.
Oh, okay. I think it's definitely easier to pee on/off a boat.
Well, the peeing isn't the problem, right? You've got the world as your toilet.
Speak for yourself, Mr. 49-year-old. But it's not the problem now, it soon will be.
But I seem to recall like the number 2 portion of living on the boat was this sort of, seat that was on an angle in the wall.
Ah, yes.
Right?
I know exactly of what you speak.
Yeah, and so I had that in mind when I was thinking about your garden office. Like, could you just have like a nicely angled butt-shaped hole in the wall to just drop a deuce from?
For the next time you visit?
For the next time I visit. From the inside out.
Yeah. My neighbors have specifically asked me not to stick my butt either out my window or out a butt-shaped wall in my office.
This is, what the problem with it is, it can be accessed either way. So someone might just be passing. They're like, oh, hey, there's a toilet, and just make it.
Are we using any of this?
We're using all of this.
Are we working on any usable intro material?
All right.
Come for the whiskey, stay for the how does one poop when one doesn't have access to a toilet?
Jason, talk to me.
We've done all the things. We don't say so in transitions. We don't use one another's names in transitions. This one is serious. We have used them all of them.
We're in a new year.
New year, same old us.
Yeah, right. Fuck.
Wherever I go, that's where I am.
What dram or drams did you pour to celebrate the new year? Did you have some? Did you think about them?
I didn't.
You didn't?
I didn't at all. No, I was in bed for 10:30 and just moved on with my life. I think New Year is the worst time of year. I actively dislike it. And
what? Why do you actively dislike it?
I think it's ridiculously stupid. And I think it highlights the circularity of time rather than the linearity of time, and it brings us back around to where we were 12 months ago, but really we're still just moving forward into the future. So,
so are you saying that the annual celebration of a new year is counter to how we should be proceeding in life?
In a sense, yes.
Interesting.
Well, what whiskey did you have?
So I had 3 whiskeys. I wanted to have something that commemorated the year that we were going into. So I got a 23-year-old Imperial by Exclusive Malts.
Okay.
It's the only sherry, not the only, but the only open sherry cask Imperial that I own.
When was it bottled?
When was it bottled?
I asked you first.
This one was distilled. Okay, so there you go. It was distilled in 1990, bottled in January 2014.
I'm looking at a tall bottle in your hand.
Yeah, right. So this was part of his
label.
bird.
I always liked the bird labels.
But it was a bird. Even when he did the bird label, it was in that sort of more squat, wider bottle. This is in a standard tall round. I don't know if the whole bottling went into this bottle. I think this bottle was his line sample. David Sturck gifted me this bottle, and you can see I enjoyed half of it.
You have been enjoying it.
So that was one whiskey. Then the other whiskey was a Redbreast.
Oh, there you go. Which one?
So this was a small batch, cast strength small batch for Julio's Liquors and Redstone Liquors in Massachusetts. And it's all from Oloroso sherry casks.
A small batch Redbreast. Is there an age statement on it?
Oh, yeah. Actually, it's not. So it's. I'll read this to you. Unique among whiskeys, Redbreast Small Batch is a single pot still Irish whiskey comprising exclusively of pot still whiskeys, which have been triple distilled and matured for no less than 14 years in a combination of bourbon and sherry casks. So
and how long have you had that bottle, do you think?
That's a good question. I've had it for some time. I bought this prior to the pandemic. And I just opened it. I opened this on just a few days before Christmas Eve.
Whoa, you've been enjoying that.
Well, I shared it.
Good company.
Yes, yeah. Right, because we had it. We had people over for latkes and just whatever. So I shared this with those people. And that's where the majority of the damage went on this bottle. Because on New Year's Eve, we had one couple over, and they don't drink. We just sort of ate cheese and played charades, and I had a couple pours of whiskey.
That's the closest one can get to drinking by oneself on New Year's Eve. I know there were other people present. You were kind of drinking alone.
I was totally drinking alone. But I'll tell you, we watched the ball drop. Well, we didn't watch the ball drop. We watched the Dolly Parton, Miley Cyrus thing for about 3 minutes. And it became 2020.
That's all it took?
It became 2023, and we went to sleep. And I wasn't drunk at any point in the night, and I woke up feeling great. That's not so bad. It's kind of nice when you can wake up feeling great after a New Year's Eve gathering.
You know you're getting old when feeling great happens less often.
My spleen didn't hurt.
What's your third pour?
Fuck.
We're not going to start the year with an incomplete Joshua Hatton list. We're going to complete this list hell or high water.
Trying to remember do you know what my third pour was? I know what my third pour was.
Was it your whiskey of the year?
Oh, easy. It wasn't my whiskey of the year. It was the Highland Park Hjarta.
Oh, fantastic.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Dabby Dozy.
Yep. Doesn't get
Oh,
much
you
better
went
than
sherry, sherry, sherry. Did you say that redbreast was sherry, or did you correct that?
that. Yeah, bourbon and sherry. Yeah, it
Bourbon
was
and sherry,
3
yeah.
sherries. Yep.
Well, can I get in on the action then? So, I tell you what I do like about the new year.
All right.
Not New Year's Eve, not New Year's Day, not that part of things. In the new year, I like seeing friends for the first time and having that dram that will set them on the road into that new year, right? And so I had a good friend over on Thursday, Friday. Yeah, time, how does it work? It must have been, gosh, Tuesday into Thursday. It was Thursday. This is all good material. Thursday. How does Jason remember days of the week?
Can you extend this part of it?
Was it Thursday? I can check my calendar, so I'm 100% certain. So he came by on Thursday, and I broke out a whiskey it's from a distillery that I don't normally dabble in, and he certainly doesn't dabble in, but it's a distillery that's taken on special meaning because of you and your involvement in my life.
Interesting.
And then it's a selection by someone else who has taken on more importance in my life. And it's a cracking dram, absolutely cracking. And great Highland, incredible sherry presence, first fill sherry butt.
Okay.
Bottled at 66.6% alcohol.
Oh, jeepers. I can only think of
From
one. Yeah.
Signatory to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Whiskey Exchange.
Do I know this bottle? Was it the Kleinlich? The Kleinlich 18? No, that wasn't.
11-year-old.
Wasn't Kleinlich. Okay. Oh, you want me to be? Am I guessing? Is this where I guess? No, you want me to shut up so you can continue your story.
I was just waiting to see what you wanted to do. Here, what's the name of the distillery?
You said Highland.
Highland. Special connection for you and me. Big sherry profile on this particular bottling. High alcohol. I would assume selected by Ollie. Sukhinder, if it was for the 20th anniversary, I'm sure Sukhinder had a hand in this as well.
A Highland distillery that I gave you, like you found an appreciation for this distillery through knowing me. Ben Nevis.
It's a good answer. We actually followed it with a Ben Nevis.
Okay.
And I poured the Funky Monkey that you got from the Whiskey Exchange.
And
and gifted
peated
over
Ben
to me.
Nevis.
Yeah.
Oh boy, did I not like that.
It's much softer now. It's not the same Funky Monkey you gave me.
It was like nightmares. I didn't like it. Anyway.
Oh no, that's a good whiskey. My friend Jared guessed Lechig on that Ben Nevis. I was like, yep, I see exactly why you say that. Exactly why you say that.
Yeah, maybe.
It's got that Funky Monkey peated quality going on.
Yeah.
With a bit of that sherry going around the Highland peat funk. Anyway, that's a different whiskey. The one we're talking about is from a distillery. As soon as I give you the letter, you're going to get the distillery.
Oh, fuck.
I love it when you don't, to be honest.
Yeah.
Highland Distillery begins with the letter D that has a special
Deanston.
place. There you go.
There you go, Deanston.
Yep. Really cracking Deanston. And so that was the first pour for myself and Jared as we look into this 2023. He's starting a new job, the first working Monday of the new year. And so sent him on happy trails, beginning with that Deanston, followed it with the Ben Nevis, and then, made our way through a few others.
Nice. I like that, right? Because it's a new beginning for him. So it's a cool way to honor it.
There you go. So, as you said a moment ago, we had our year in review, which was a terrific episode. I'm sure some of our listeners are almost finished listening to it. A fantastic episode. But for now, we are moving into a year in preview with our very dear friend, Susannah Skiver Barton, who
Indeed.
we've had on the podcast before.
That we have.
And here's the thing. I've been thinking about this since we recorded the interview with her. I go into talking to her thinking we see the whiskey industry the same way.
Yeah.
And coming out of talking with her, I'm always struck by her perspective. And she always says things that I haven't thought about. And she always, reflects upon things that I haven't thought about. And even when we get to this year in preview with her, and we talk a bit about 22, gosh, we get into the last decade of whiskey.
Yeah.
And we use that to inform what we're looking at as we're going into 23. And there's a part that'll come up later on in the interview that when she said it, I thought, yeah, you're so right. That is something we should be watching out for in 2023 and discussing more in 23. I thought it was really excellent. And so, yeah, I wanted to make that particular point clear. Her perspective is pleasingly different from my own.
Oh, I like that. Here's something that I liked about the interview. Like you had said, we had Susannah on before, but similarly to the reason I selected you and Morgan, last year as my episode of the year, my favorite conversation of the year, it was because it was getting together with an old whiskey friend and talking about whiskey. That's a ton of fun. And it's nice getting together with Susannah because, A, she's a friend. She's a lot of fun to talk to. But exactly what you said. She's one that I would always follow her articles and read because, well, it's because of the very reason we brought her on to the podcast. She has her finger on the pulse. This is her life. She kind of breathes it and she's paying attention to so much of the industry that we simply don't have the time to pay attention to, that we get to have this whiskey conversation with a friend, and she brings us up to date and she tells us what to look forward to. I really liked that, and I think listening back and editing back to it, I already feel as if this episode is a contender for an episode of the year. It was just great and interesting. And I think too, sometimes I come to an interview and I'll have some questions in mind, and I think I do an okay job. It's conversations like the one we had with Susannah where I felt I really needed to rise to the challenge and ask different probing questions. I feel as if she kind of forced me to ask better questions, and I kind of liked that about this conversation.
I was thinking during it when we'd set up the interview with her, and for the benefit of the listeners here, we'd sent an email saying, okay, this time, this place, this link, let's make this happen, and we had called it from the very beginning a year in preview. And Susannah had written back and said, well, let me know if there's anything in particular you want to ask about. And we'd responded and just said, look, it's just the industry writ large, 23. And as we then, transitioned to the actual interview, and as listeners are about to hear in just a few moments, the first question is, so what do you see in the future? And she said, and she's kind of like, well, where? Yeah. Who? How?
And she's like, that's kind of broad, but then she starts going into it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. And as we went through our conversation, we spend a lot of time on bourbon. I didn't expect that going into our interview. We spend a little bit of time on single malt scotch. That's always my number one focus. That always takes up most of my brain. We go into American single malts. That's an exciting addition that is definitely roaming around in my brain. We talked consumers, we talked retailers, we talked wholesalers, right? We covered that 3-tier system. So there's a lot on the table there. And it's teasing out distinct aspects of this industry writ large.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, listen, I don't think that there's much else we could say. I think we should probably just hand it over to our conversation with us and Susannah. And then once we come out of that conversation, we'll have a bit of news to share. And we will finally do a tasting of our fourth and final blind barrel sample that we received from Seabass.
Let's go. Happy New Year, Susannah. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am tickety-boo. And I am very excited to kick off the year talking to you about everything that 2023 can possibly hold from a whiskey industry standpoint.
Everything? Every single thing. All right.
All the things. Did you see our last episode was 4 hours? We have all the time in the world to discuss this in minute detail.
Great. We're going to be here for a while.
Yeah, do not leave a single detail out.
You cleared your whole calendar for this. So can I ask you a question? Since it's an interview, I feel like it's the right thing to do. How did you think 2022 went with the industry?
Overall, like across all categories of whiskey, it could have been worse. It was an improvement.
I thought it was only us saying that. Okay, cool.
No, I think it was an improvement on 2021 and 2020. It was heartening, to have a full year of having no tariffs, at least for Scotch incoming to the U.S. I can't remember when the U.K. lifted their tariffs on American. That might have been 2022. Time is meaningless now.
It was.
So that'll be, but that's very optimistic and gives, I think it's very positive coming into this year too. That's such a broad question because we can look at it from the point of view of tariffs and pure cold numbers and data. But I think we also can and will and should look at it from the perspective of just the consumer and the whiskey drinker and what was the year like for them. And I think it was very dependent on what you were trying to drink or drinking in 2022. So if you were like you or me or Josh and trying to drink, good single malt Scotch, I think it was a great year for that. Because good single malt Scotch was not really going up in price for the most part. I think prices.
Interesting.
Well,
interesting.
After 2019 and into 2021, I think things held last year. If you're trying to drink everyday bourbon, fine. But most bourbon drinkers, or at least the ones we hear from, are trying to drink more than just everyday bourbon. And it was another difficult year if you were chasing after the trendy stuff, the hot stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point, though, about the bourbon. I think one of the things that I saw change, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll disagree, and this isn't exclusive to 2022, it's been a bit of an evolution, was that the description of what an everyday drinking bourbon is has changed, right? Like Blanton's was an everyday bourbon. Elmer T. Lee was an everyday bourbon.
Was Blanton's ever really an everyday bourbon, though? I would challenge that. I think Blanton's was priced where it could be everyday for people who 5 or 10 years ago, were used to paying everyday Scotch prices. But if you were a bourbon drinker 10 years ago, Blanton's was not an everyday price, and it wasn't an everyday bourbon. Just look at the way it looks.
Okay.
People, even if they could afford it for every day, I mean, Blanton's is presented as more than every day because of its appearance, and it's a single barrel and all of that. So I would challenge that assumption, but I would not challenge what you said to begin with, which is that what is an everyday bourbon has evolved. I think that is true. And everyday bourbon used to be Wild Turkey 101. Now that's at the very low end of everyday bourbon. Now Maker's 46 is an everyday bourbon. To a lot of people, a Russell's Reserve is going to be an everyday bourbon.
Oh, that's interesting.
Pivoting back just real quickly for the listeners, what kind of price would you be talking on the Blantons? Because I like what Susannah's saying about if you were buying everyday Scotch, everyday Blantons look very affordable. What kind of number are we talking there?
I mean, 10 years ago, I think Blanton's was around $30 to $40. And now I think
is what I paid.
Yeah. The SRP now is, I think, around 60, but if you're finding it for SRP, that's highly unusual. Let's just say. And $35 for a bourbon 10 years ago was for sure like on the high end because just like Maker's Mark 10 years ago was like a $20 to $25 bottle. And again, like Wild Turkey 101, that was like a $15 bottle.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of the Heaven Hill 6, the bottled and bond, that was $12 a bottle.
Yes, but remember that was also available only in Kentucky.
Also very true. Yep,
it's anachronistic to compare that, I think, because most people couldn't access it. But the point is well taken. That we were just a decade ago working in different price bands, so that an everyday Scotch 10 years ago was probably 30 to 40. I'm giving that kind of wider range because you could get Glenlivet 12, probably around $30, maybe 35. If you wanted to move up a little bit, you were probably looking at around $40 for something a little more interesting.
Yeah, like a Balvenie or something.
You're right, and that's what I was going to say. It's so funny how we're defining these categories, because for me, 20 years ago, it was Balvenie Doublewood that I considered an everyday Scotch, and that was in that $35 range, which then moved into the 60s and is working its way north of that.
Yeah.
It is funny the tastes that we have and the places where we feel most comfortable. When you mentioned Glenfiddich 12 a second ago, I've never in my life thought of Glenfiddich 12 as a daily Scotch, but obviously for millions of people, it absolutely is.
Yeah. And I think, for, again, as Scotch drinkers, single malt drinkers in particular, we are already primed to expect to pay more for it. That's just what Scotch has done for the entirety of its, post-1960s existence. Whereas bourbon, this is still a really recent phenomenon that people are looking at a $50 bottle and saying, yeah, it's an everyday drinker. And I don't think that's every day for everybody or even the majority of bourbon drinkers. But I still think that if you're really into bourbon and you see a bottle for $50 of something that seems exciting or good, you're not really going to find that to be very unusual. So,
yeah, I like when you go on Facebook or you go on Twitter or Instagram and like insert crotch shot here, right? That's what we see, and that's what you read about, right? In the magazines, you're reading about the fancy, the special. Meanwhile, go into any shop that isn't on the East Coast or on the West Coast, look on the bottom shelf, and you're going to find plenty of handles of 40% bourbon or some sort of a American whiskey blend, still at dirt cheap prices. Like, do we just simply have a skewed view of it because we're so in the thick of whiskey?
Yes. Yes, 100%. Like, of course we do. Of course we do. And I think, and the people we drink whiskey with and hang out with, even if they don't work in the industry or write about it like I do, because we hang out with them, like, presumably most of our whiskey friends are whiskey people. And so that also, it's confirmation bias that, yeah, everybody's drinking Balvenie Doublewood, but actually No, like a lot of people are drinking McClellan's, which I don't even know who bottles that. Is that a Ian McLeod or?
No,
I don't know.
It was Morrison Bowmore back in the day.
All right. Who knows who owns it these days? But it is true. And so I moved to North Carolina in 2022, which is a place I grew up. But obviously I wasn't drinking or going into liquor stores as a minor. And this is my first time.
Oh, sorry, as a minor.
It's my first time living here since college, right? And in college, where was I going when I went into the liquor store? I was going straight to the bottom shelf vodka, obviously. Whatever was cheapest and would mix into jungle juice. But so now I'm going into the liquor store mostly for curiosity. I'm not buying much in there. But I go to the bourbon section, which is big. It's certainly bigger than I'm sure it was in the early 2000s when I last lived here.
Sure.
And it's really not shocking, but surprising to me how many brands, almost all on the bottom shelf of that I've never heard of are there. And I can pick them up and read the label and usually divine which company is making them and just bottling them and selling them. I mean, they may be just a control state brand. They may be just for North Carolina, these may not be available in other markets, but Heaven Hill or Sazerac or whoever owns that brand, has a great contract in place, or, they've built up a market for this particular bourbon or whatever. But I do find it interesting because I've, as a writer, never had any exposure to these brands at all. And frankly, if I go to someone's house who's not really a whiskey person, but like they know I am, if they offer me a whiskey, they'll bring out like, oh, hey, here's my Gentleman Jack, or here, I've got some great Maker's Mark, or, they bring out nice stuff for me, which I appreciate. But I'm so interested in these really cheap plastic handles. And one of these days I will pitch a story to someone and hopefully they'll bite and take it about like drinking these no-name bottom shelf whiskeys of the control states. I don't know. I don't know if it would be a particularly interesting story, but I think if I could get the companies to talk to me about them, it might be. But the other side of that too is that they're not all bottom shelf. So there's also this like really interesting layer in the shelves, kind of around the premium to super premium level, sitting alongside, some of the like Hardin's Creek from Jim Beam, or maybe a Maker's Private Select that the ABC picked. And there'll be these like nice looking super premium bourbons with names, again, I do not recognize and have never seen. And I like turn it over and look at the back. And these are not coming from the likes of Sazerac or Heaven Hill. These are coming from companies I've never heard of, like some, who knows, maybe someone who's just contracting with like a Bardstown Bourbon Company, or maybe not them specifically. They're pretty transparent, but like whoever, and bottling this whiskey that's probably around 4 years old, and is usually 80 to 86 proof, and has a very fancy looking package and like slick marketing language and like a cool name, usually something affiliated with like dogs or hunting or America. I live in an army-based town, so there's lots of like stars and stripes kind of spirits around. And those I find very interesting too, because again, I bet the whiskey itself is not actually that like compelling to me as a serious whiskey drinker, but the marketing, right, or the existence of that bottle on the shelf is providing some kind of reason for people to pick it up. Unless, of course, like the ABC stocks it as a one-off, nobody buys it, and then they don't stock it again. But
that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you is this realm of marketing, and do you think consumers are defining themselves by the spirit they're drinking, or are they defining themselves by the bottle and the package that they're putting on their shelf and pulling out for friends who are coming over?
When you say defining themselves by the spirit, do you mean like the style or the specific brand?
The actual liquid, the flavors, the profile, the texture.
To some extent, maybe. I think the subset of people who are really into barrel proof or like super oaky bourbons, maybe. Yeah. But I think for a lot of people, it's much more brand based. And not to say that they're loyal to a particular brand or, you know, I mean, of course you still have people who are, I'm a Jack Daniels guy. And like, that's great. Like Jack Daniels really, that's the brand you have to think of when someone's like super loyal. It's Jack or Jim, or if they're Scotch drinker, Johnny. But I do,
one of those guys.
I think it's not overtly packaging and marketing. No one would be like, you know, like, this is my favorite bourbon because I love the way the bottle looks on my shelf. Of course, that's true. A lot of people look at, you can, all three of us are surrounded, you know, people won't be able to see this, but we're talking on Zoom and we're all three surrounded by shelves of bottles. And I love the way various bottles look on my shelf. And I think that's true of everybody who drinks spirits as more than just a way to get drunk, you know, who's interested in spirits and drinks them as a hobby, but no one would admit to, I bought it for the bottle. I mean, maybe if it's like a really novelty bottle, but usually not. But I think the bottle is part of that, where people are caught up in the story. I know every marketer in the world talks about storytelling these days. But it is really true. People want to feel that whatever they have chosen to put on their shelf and put in their glass, you know, has some meaning for them. And who can blame them? And the brands that are creating meaning, I think, are going to stand the test of time right now. There's a lot of brands who aren't. The field is very crowded. It's hard to do that. It's possible to do it, but it's really hard to do it if you're buying barrels or contract distilling, and that's, you know, and you're coming up with a story about your brand that isn't really about either of those things. So I just realized I'm saying this to two independent bottlers, but you guys obviously, you know, strike a different chord. You are obviously independent bottlers. That's the whole point of your company. You talk about the barrels, you talk about where they come from. The story of each distillery that you work with becomes part of your story. It's very transparent. It's very honest, very authentic. And there are a lot of brands right now who probably can't be honest because you work with a broker or whoever, you know, you access these barrels. You're not allowed to say they came from the 1792 distillery or whatever. But at the same time, you know, you can't really, I don't think they're making so much of an effort to develop a real point of access for consumers other than the bottle looks great, the whiskey's fine. I don't want to, you know, put anybody down, but I'm exhausted by the number of brands that come out that are sourced bourbon that are fine. The bourbon's fine. I'm sure the people who are making it are just decent business people, but there's nothing there. It's an air sandwich as far as story. And as far as me as a journalist, like I hate, you know, I hate to say it, but this is the truth. Like, stories that people want to publish are stories about what's new, what's exciting, what's different. Another bourbon that comes from wherever, MGP or undisclosed, that is 4 to 6 years old, that is $70 to $80, and that has a name no one's ever heard of and nothing really compelling about it. It's very hard to write about that. It's very hard to get excited about it.
And that's why I thought it was the right time in the conversation to ask you my question, because it seems like you could be a business person, you could join all the dots, you could have liquid in a bottle, and then you stick an American flag on it, or a hunting dog, or another racehorse, and now you've got, quote unquote, a brand. And I'm obviously it's resonating with people that I don't know, but like, how is that resonating? How is that landing?
I don't think all of it is resonating. I think a lot of these brands are finding success because it's frankly really hard to get allocated limited edition, you know, more interesting bourbons. If the demand is too high right now. So they're succeeding because people just want to buy something different. And that there it is, there's something different. And maybe they take their bottle home, drink it. They're like, okay, that was different. It wasn't different enough for me to go and spend another $75 on it. But, you know, I don't regret that one purchase. But that's not how you build a brand for the long term. It reminds me a lot of probably like 5 or 7 years ago. There was this real boom in Irish whiskey brands, all sourcing from Cooley.
Yeah.
All around $30, all with like an Irish sounding name and, you know, green packaging and shamrocks or whatever, and all tasting exactly the same. And good, because Cooley is delicious, but but they all kind of just flooded the market all at once. And of all the brands that came out around then, maybe there's 2 or 3 that are probably still sort of in with decent distribution, maybe making some sales, but I think a lot of them just faded away. You know, because they offered nothing different for consumers, including, you know, at that point, they didn't even offer any different stories. You know, I think some people enjoy the like Irishness of just, it's an Irish name. Oh, from the old county with the old folks. But most whiskey drinkers now, and even 5 or 7 years ago, weren't, you know, it was either, if you're drinking Irish whiskey, you were drinking Jameson or you were drinking Redbreast, and in between there wasn't that market yet. There is now, but there wasn't then.
It's interesting though that, you know, I like that you brought the Irish part of it into the conversation, because I forgot how much that started to mirror what we had been seeing in the bourbon world. And just really quickly back to the bourbon world, I had, I guess, wrongly assumed that after the Templeton Rye incident, where they got into a bit of trouble, right?
Well deserved.
They
actually did lie.
Well, they did. But the thing around that was it really seemed to be this. There seemed to be a segment of people calling for transparency. Like, wait a second, what are we drinking? This isn't made in such and such a state. They're getting this from, you know. And for a while, it thought like, oh, we might start to understand where this liquid is actually coming from, and maybe we'll get some real stories. Meanwhile, there's plenty of, you know, horse brands or Uncle Jebediah's sour mash, you know, my great-great-grandpa, you know, all of this stuff. I had hoped we'd get more toward transparency, especially in this modern internet age. As we're looking at 2023 and beyond, do you see a place for that? Do you see the evolution towards more transparency, or do you think we'll still like revert back into this more comfortable position of great granddad's whatever, or patio tools, you know single pot still, whatever.
I think we are in a better place than we were since the Templeton time. And also we have a lot of runway. It's not a linear progression, right? It's not, we can't just go from we could, but we haven't, and we won't just go from A to B all the way to Z, because it's not a unified force of people calling for transparency. The bourbon consumer segment, at the time of the Templeton incident, was, I think, had a higher concentration of kind of diehard whiskey nerds and people really into whiskey as a more than just a casual pastime, but and so it felt like, yes, okay, we're all pushing for transparency, and Templeton got, judgment handed down to them in court. I think they had to pay back a bunch of money. That felt like a great win. Now we're seeing very few companies overtly lying now. But yes, this sort of lack of transparency about who made the whiskey, where did it come from, whatever. the consumer segment, I think, now has been diluted by people who have come into bourbon for whom that is a less important value. I still don't think any bourbon drinker is okay with Uncle Jebediah's, it was Uncle Jebediah's recipe, for this bourbon. And I think most bourbon drinkers are very skeptical of those claims now, but not all. And there's enough people out there buying bourbon now that these kinds of brands, can have a hope of selling their bottles. Again, I don't think that's a way to, I don't think that's a long-term strategy. And I think most of them are not going to find extended success there. And meanwhile, I think the push for transparency, I think you can already see what that has yielded. Look at companies, we talked about Bardstown Bourbon Co. a minute ago. Bardstown Bourbon Co., which is almost entirely a contract distiller, but has its own brands, they put out huge amounts of information about what they're making. I really commend them. They share the mash bills. They talk about how old the whiskeys are. If you read their labels, it's nicely broken down. And they're not the only one. I think there are a lot more distillers who are responding to the call for transparency with sharing of information, talking about, and sometimes it's just straight up part of the marketing strategy. Like, oh, well, we'll tell you what level of which warehouse these barrels aged in because we know like you're really into honey barrels from particular warehouses. But that's okay. It's still information that they're sharing. And as they do that, we, the consumer, start to expect that more and more, and thus demand it of the companies who aren't doing it. Yeah. So it's a mixed bag, but I still think that we're trending towards continued transparency. What I'd like to see is more transparency from companies about things that are not strictly related to just the hard production of the bourbon, but like, how about transparency about how you treat your workers, transparency about environmental efforts that you're doing, talk about how you're reducing your wastewater or whatever. Some things that I think that's the next level of transparency that I am hoping the industry starts to share. Because I think there are, again, a lot of success stories to share in there. I mean, whiskey making is a resource intensive process, but there are definitely distilleries making strides in reducing their carbon footprint, in recycling their wastewater, in this or that, and they should be making that a part of their message to consumers, so the consumers know that this is an important thing to value as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm seeing that on the Scotch whiskey side of things, right, with Ardnamurchan and Nick Nean. And then, with Isla Distilleries really, putting a focus on peat and what that does to the environment. Meanwhile, gardening centers are responsible for 99% of the whole peat stuff, but that's another story.
96, to be fair.
Oh, all right, 96. Sorry.
I think that ban is now enforced. I think that's now happened, that garden centers are now out of the peat business.
Oh, I thought
that's great.
I was just about to say, I thought that was a 2023 thing. Guess what, kids? It's 2023.
Welcome to the year in preview.
So we're starting to see that, and there you go, year in preview, right? 2023. if we have the year right, you've got the UK government putting a ban on peat for garden centers, and you have distilleries really paying close attention to what their production does to peat. I guess my question to you, because you really do have your thumb on the pulse, you're the writer about the new stuff, the new and exciting stuff. Are you hearing whispers of more of that? And do you think it's consumer driven that they're looking for this? Do the consumers care about it, or will the consumers learn to care about it as more producers embrace these green initiatives?
I think it's both, but more the latter. I think consumers are not aware that they should care about it. There are a lot of people who care about the environment, who care about impacts on, local flora and fauna or whatever. And they have absolutely no awareness of how the whiskey industry fits into that. Because why would they? Most people who drink a bourbon or a scotch are never going to visit a distillery. They're probably never going to even be able to tell you what fermentation is. And that's perfectly okay. I think a lot of people who drink whiskey may not even be able to tell you what its base ingredient is. And again, totally okay. But these are potentially also people who go to the store and buy organic meat or vegetables, or people who are looking for fair trade coffee, people who have values that they express through their purchases, and that they have, learned about and decided based on years of education, whether self-education or education from the industry, about the differences. What's the difference between a caged chicken and a free range one? What's the difference between this or that? And so I think, and materially, what ends up in the bottle, is there a difference between something that's made at a plant that, has reduced its carbon footprint by X or Y and something that isn't? No, you're not going to be able to taste that in the whiskey in most cases, but that doesn't mean it's not important. I think the industry has to lead here. And I certainly think small distillers, like you named Ardnamurchan and McNean in Scotland. Yeah. And there are craft distillers, lots of craft distillers here in the US who absolutely have made those values part of their operating procedures and part of what they talk to people about, but they are small. We need to have the industry leaders doing that too. And I want to give some credit, like Diageo, I get press releases from them every now and then about this distillery or that has been made carbon neutral, and they have put money into lots of impressive technologies. And, I want to give them a shout out for that.
Nice.
But that's not, where are they talking about that, on the side of the bullet bottle or the Johnny Walker box? They're expecting some coverage from the media, and they get it sometimes, but that's not enough. That needs to, I think we need to start telling. Lots of brands are like, we want to tell a new story about whiskey. And I'm like, great. This is a new story you can tell. This is a new framework, through which you can present whiskey. But very few are doing that at this point. Perhaps because very few are able to do that. Like a lot of distilleries are not anywhere close to being environmentally friendly. And maybe, the companies are working on that. But again, these little guys who have built that into their business from day one, hats off to them. They're going to lead the way for now, and then if some larger players get involved, that's when the momentum, I think, will start.
Yeah, I also wonder if for the consumer there's a certain cynicism that at this moment being environmental becomes a marketing ploy.
Totally.
And when you throw around words like carbon neutral, the consumer rolls their eyes and, well, of course you are, because you think that's what I'm looking for. But there are obviously real conversations to be had there. And I think having producers take on a role there that moves beyond the marketing and the simple market release, I think can really help and help get the consumer beyond that cynicism as well. It's been true for a good few years in Scotland. You go around a distillery and at some point they'll tell you about the water treatment plant that's behind that line of trees if you look out that window over there.
Yeah.
But it was never really rolled into anything bigger than that. It was more just here's the point at which we tell you to trust us on water. Moving on.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think the big distilleries, the big players are going to have to make peace with the fact that at the beginning, this is not going to be something with ROI. You shouldn't be talking about this because you hope it will sell more bottles. You should be talking about it because it's a real part of your operating ethos and the way you make the whiskey, and it's important. And I think it's important for the long run health of the industry, because these issues are not going to go away. They're only going to get worse. I went to, you talked about the wastewater treatment over, but the best distillery visit I ever had, where I got to see up close like all these things they were doing that had a meaningful impact, was at a Knock Do distillery, but a Knock whiskey.
With Gordon?
Yeah, with Gordon.
Gordon,
with Knock.
The distillery manager there, he is such a whirlwind of genius. He had all these just ingenious little hacks he had put into place to conserve energy, to reuse this and that. And he was so passionate about everything, the whole 9 yards, everything at the distillery, and taking me around and explaining how this thing and that thing worked. I mean, let's see more of that. Someone put Gordon on a documentary talking about this, with his cute dogs, like that. And where do we ever hear about that? I mean, I don't know that IBHL even fully understands maybe the gem that they have in Gordon. I'm totally singling out Knock 2 in particular, but there's just, it starts there, and it cannot be greenwashing for the sake of moving more bottles. It's not going to work.
100%. 100%.
And people will see through it.
Yep.
I think people will see through it, and I also think I want to say this right. I want this to come out as a neutral statement here. You will get a story from this distillery, that distillery, Diageo, Pernod, whomever, and they'll talk about their green initiatives, or they'll talk about whatever, and that information doesn't necessarily get on to the label or onto the branding, because the branding is very specific. If you think about a large demographic of the American bourbon drinking consumer, we right now have this sort of cultural divide of left and right. And you've got the left that don't want to do what the right does, and you have the right that doesn't want to do what the left does. And typically speaking, the left is associated with green initiatives, climate change, how could we fix it? And the right says, what are you talking about? It's, that's not my concern. My concern is something else. And then you've got brands that are like, this is my hunting dog. This is the dead elk that I killed. I'm just using terms here. And people on the left are like, that's not what I'm about. I want to, treat wildlife nicely, and so on and so forth. And so my point is, with all that laid out, do you think that larger companies have a little bit of trepidation in updating their marketing to talk about some of these green initiatives, or talk about some of the other things that they do, so that it fits with those with the mindset on the right and the mindset on the left?
Yes, totally. And I would also say they lack imagination, because of course they're afraid, because they're seeing it as a binary. But there's a lot more gray area in there, and it's not like you have to hit people over the head with carbon footprint this and, whatever, environmentalism that. Of course not. There are so many ways to talk about this stuff that are not polarizing. And I just don't see these companies trying very hard. I don't. Because look at a small craft distillery. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of someone in the US who I really want to hold up as, it'll come to me as soon as we've ended this
Stop
conversation,
recording.
of
Yeah,
course.
exactly.
But there are at least a half a dozen for whom these issues are a core part of how they operate. And I bet if you went to them and said, hey, who drinks your whiskey? Is it Democrats or Republicans? They'd say it's everybody, because they like our whiskey. You know, they're interested in what we're doing. They see us doing, you know, having these impacts in our community, economic impacts, but also environmental impacts. And, you know, and they want to support a small business that's, you know, working in this area. And so I would just say the big guys they're not trying hard enough. They have how many millions and tens of millions of dollars to spend on marketing. And so many of them just recycle the same tired old tropes. And it's like, guys, you know, have some imagination, for Christ's sakes. Like, you know, it's just, I know it's really hard. And when you're a big multi-million-dollar company with, you know, thousands of people's jobs on the line and all that, I get it. And big ships are hard to turn, but try something. Try something.
But go back to your example of Gordon Bruce at Knockdo. He's talking about efficiencies, and those efficiencies are saving energy. And saving energy means saving money. And saving all of those things saves the environment. Like that to me is, you can jump into that pitch, and it's not a pitch in the marketing sense, it's just a presentation, but you can jump into that pitch at any point and see which one you value along the way. When we had Gordon on the podcast, he actually gave the phone number for his marketing department for listeners to call up and harangue them because of his great distaste for all things marketing. And we actually beeped out the number so that listeners could not call up the marketing department for Inverhouse and harangue them.
That's hilarious.
But it goes to show, you're right, Gordon has his fiefdom, right? The knock is his, and he runs it to the absolute best of his ability, which is immense, as you rightly point out. But I think there's such an interesting and compelling way to tell that story that speaks to what you're saying about lack of imagination with certain marketing departments.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to pick on Knockdo's parent company at all. That was just like, you know, that was the example that I think about my visit to that distillery constantly. It was fascinating to see all, you know, it's not a young distillery. It's an old facility. They're still using calculators, you know, when they're, and hydrometers. I mean, there's no computerization of running the stills, very hands-on, but then he just had all these, you know, little engineers sort of ideas, the sorts of things where 150 years ago, he would have patented this or that, and, you know, gone on to,
his horizontal shell and tube condenser.
That.
Out back next to the worm tub. It's a great place to go visit, and he's a great man to spend time with. Yeah.
So, you know, big whiskey companies lacking imagination. I don't think that's a headline. That's they're always going to be several steps behind the more nimble little guys who are more, frankly, just more in touch with their consumer, and also less concerned with maybe reaching every consumer, right? Less concerned with moving volume because they don't have volume to move. And I think big companies could learn a few things from that. But instead, they're all making highly allocated, you know, small batch bourbons priced for too much money that will sell out immediately.
I'm with bourbon and Scotch and Irish discussed. I'm curious about a category that Joshua and I are very close to and champion continually. But I'm curious your perspective and your experience in American single malt. And what have you seen there, and what do you think 23 might hold for that category?
I think it was very exciting when the TTB announced they were on the cusp of formalizing the regulations for American single malt, and then we haven't gotten there yet. It's continue to sit on the cusp, teetering a little bit.
It's getting uncomfortable.
I think it was a huge deal for the industry and absolutely no one else. I don't think the number of consumers drinking American single malt and seeking it out are minuscule. I don't think most liquor store owners are terribly excited by it unless they are a whiskey specialty shop. There is so much work to do. I think that distillers are capable of doing it, and I'm excited. I really do think that American single malt is going to cement itself alongside bourbon and rye in the pantheon of great, truly American whiskeys. But it's a long time before that happens. You know, there's a lot of still so much consumer outreach to do, and so much. Just as you know, if you ask even someone who's like a pretty interested whiskey drinker, hey, do you know what single malt is? What are they going to say? You know, a lot of them are going to say, well, I think it's Scotch and maybe it's got peat, or they're not, they might, I think it's made from grain. It's just, we are still at a very, basic place of education, and that's okay. We're farther along than we were 5 years ago. I think it's massive, absolutely massive, that Jack Daniel's released a single malt last year. Massive. That's at least because now they're going to be able to reach their audience, which is a hell of a lot of people. Their single malt does not taste like most of the other American single malts being made right now. That's okay. One of the things I love about single malt, and I think you guys do too, is that it is a very diverse whiskey in terms of flavor and
variability.
It's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's the beauty of it.
Still a long way to go, but we're starting. We're all already so far down the road. There's just a lot more road.
Okay. Do you have a big player in North Carolina
for single malt?
Yeah. Do you have anyone that's kind of at the forefront of it?
No.
Just
There's North Carolina's craft distilling industry is still pretty small. The state has not perhaps made it super easy for craft distillers. No, I actually haven't.
It's interesting.
Visited very many distilleries. I'm going to one next week, and it's my goal for 2023 to hit up a lot more. But
smart.
No, unfortunately, my experience with the North Carolina whiskeys that I've had has been not good. but there's a lot I haven't tried, so I am looking forward to continuing to explore.
That really surprises me, given, I mean, my understanding of American whiskey and its history is a bit sparse. It's a bit shoddy, but my understanding is that there was a period of time where North Carolina played a pretty decent part in the growth of the spirit. And so the fact that while there's this massive boom throughout, most of the states, it's surprising that North Carolina seems comparatively small.
There's just such a weird subculture of like anti-alcohol folks around here. I mean, we are a really strict control state, and anytime the legislature tries to introduce reforms, the usual characters come out of the woodwork and talk about how corrupting alcohol is, spirits in particular. Because North Carolina has a great craft beer industry, very thriving. But yeah, I don't know. It's a weird little place. I think slowly things are coming along. There are more distilleries that have opened in the last, say, 4 to 5 years than like 10 years ago. There were probably, I don't know, a half dozen distilleries tops. And now there's a lot more. I think the state's just behind other parts of the country that got into the movement earlier and made it easy for people to open distilleries and make them into viable businesses. Yeah.
Can I pivot just a little bit with 2023 in mind? I had a question regarding a trend I started seeing in 2022. I'm curious if you saw the same and what you think it's going to look like in 2023. And that trend is more and more shops. Let me do this again. 10 years ago, you would have the specialty shops that would have their own single barrel of McKenna, Blanton's, insert distillery here. And that was a special thing. And you went to that store if you were a whiskey fanatic because they had this special stuff and, Joe's mom and pop didn't. Fast forward 10 years and everybody has their own
I know what Joe's mom and
barrel.
pop are selling.
Yeah, right? Everybody has their own single barrel. In fact, they have multiple single barrels. But what I've been hearing from some retailers is that those single barrels are not moving like they had been. They're sitting on more inventory than they had been previously. And so I wonder if you saw the same sort of evolution of that and what your thoughts are on 2023 and beyond for that idea of the store pick.
I don't talk to retailers the way you do, so I don't have that perspective, and it's really interesting to hear it. I will say I definitely think the momentum of excitement for single barrels has diminished among the sort of hardcore, and I do think the hardcore bourbon drinkers. I think the more casual ones, again, are probably still, a single barrel. That's different from the last thing I bought here the other day. Okay, let me try it.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, there's been a glut. Everybody has a dozen different single barrels. How, as the person who's going into the shop with $100 to spend, how do you choose? Do you choose based on, well, I liked the single barrel of this brand that they chose last time, so I'll get this one again, or, oh no, I'm afraid it might taste the same, so let me try something. It's impossible. And I'm sure there's a name for this paradox, but at retail of any kind, if you have too much choice, it can be oddly paralyzing to where you just end up buying the same thing again and again. And I think maybe we're seeing that here. What is it?
What's it called, Jason?
Burian's ass is the paradox.
His
Burian's ass?
What about his ass?
Burian's ass, as in a donkey, mule.
Like a double scribble? But yeah.
But then you look at, you look at Trader Joe's, right, which is wildly popular and has a highly selective, stock inventory, and people go crazy for just about everything that they put on their shelves, which I guess proves the Purian's ass.
There you go.
So no two asses are the same? You can't compare these asses? Is that...
This is going to devolve really fast.
It only took us 58 minutes, Susannah. We had to devolve somewhere.
Anyway, it's interesting. It's interesting that you're hearing that from retailers, that like the single barrels are not moving the way they were. And I think it's just probably in large part due to the fact that there's a single barrel on every corner now. And not only does this store have 12 single barrels, but the store 2 blocks away does too. And the one 4 blocks from that. And people they're not special anymore. They're not, of course, every single barrel is a snowflake, but they're not actually that special. And if you have really hardcore, like people who collect single barrels from a given distillery or whatever, and they taste them and the distillery has not been offering anything particularly special, that's very disillusioning. And again, a bad strategy. Don't do that. Don't do that. Make sure the single barrels are special.
Yeah, it's a trend that I'm definitely watching closely in 23 to see where that goes. Joshua Hatton.
Well, that's a trend that you're following. That's a trend that I'm following. I'm curious the trend that Susannah's following. Are there trends for 2023 that have really captured your attention and you want to focus on?
ASM is a big one, American Single Malt. I think Jack Daniel's really threw the gauntlet down. I know that Jim Beam has American Single Malt ready to go. They released some in last year's Little Book as part of the blend.
That's right.
I bet Sazerac has some somewhere. And maybe not much. I don't know. I don't know if Heaven Hill does, but like MGP for sure has American Single Malt that I believe they sell already. Potentially,
Heaven Hill must have it because they did that 8-year-old malt, the Parker's Heritage malt, like.
But it was a malt
years
whiskey,
ago.
not a 100% malt whiskey.
No, but I see what you're saying. That it was a mixed mash bill. It was a malt whiskey. It wasn't a single malt mixed in with a. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I think we might see more of the big guys roll out their American Single Malts this year. Now that Jack is kind of starting to make a little niche where once there was only a tiny niche. What else am I keeping an eye on? I'm interested to see when bourbon drinkers will stop buying these overpriced, no-name brands that are just regular 4-year-old bourbon. There's so much of that. It all tastes, and it can be very good. It can be just good, but it's not special. And you can buy bourbon that's just as good from Beam Suntory, from Heaven Hill, from wherever for a lot less, and with the stamp of authenticity because it's bottled under a real brand name. I don't know. I'm just like, I'm exhausted looking at the prices of things now for stuff that's like fine, but not exciting.
Yeah.
So what else? I mean, I'm looking with avid interest at e-commerce and direct to consumer shipping, which I think everybody in the industry is. Really find it very interesting that it's not only craft distillers pushing now for DTC, but you're seeing big guys get in, but in ways that feel very, that they seem to be able to smooth it over with their distributors. So Maker's Mark and I think Jim Beam both launched these very small sort of direct shipping clubs for consumers in, I think, 2021, late 2021. Just releasing some very small volume things to the small list of people who are able to sign up. And maybe that's the strategy other large companies are going to adopt, although I think a lot are still super scared to piss off the RNDCs and Southerns of the world.
Sure.
Yeah, and who knows how it's going to shake out. I do think eventually there's going to be much, much easier, freer DTC for consumers, and that the wholesalers are kind of fighting a losing battle, and instead they should start working with the suppliers to, still get whatever cut they can get, instead of just ramming these statistics down our throat that they, cooked up from some survey of America's mothers are terrified of direct shipping and believe it will kill all their children under the age of 17. Like, it's just, it's so hyperbolic that I find it really hard to believe that anyone falls for it. But of course, if you're not in the industry, this sounds totally credible. So very interested to see if there's any progress on that front this year. I think it might be a stalemate, unless maybe maybe some individual states might pass something. But
I think the pandemic, say what you want about the pandemic, it wasn't all bad. It, I think, started to present some fresh data that if DTC, direct to consumer, was allowed, children wouldn't be found drunk in the streets. And with DTC happening, well, they weren't drunk in the streets because they were drunk behind locked doors. But
it's just
I think it got to show that it was a lot of scaremongering that had occurred.
Oh, 100%.
And really, as we've it was about tax money.
The thing that kills me. The thing that kills me is that DTC wine shipping has been widely legal and widely practiced for decades. And have we seen the end of the world with children, getting their bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon and, passing out drunk in the corner? Of course not. But this demonization of spirits is so infuriating. And the wholesalers, I think, are really painting themselves into a corner in a number of ways, but including in that way by demonizing spirits and saying, well, they need to be treated differently from wine. Well, why? It's alcohol. Mm-hmm. It's all alcohol.
Yeah.
Okay. So a 750 of vodka is going to get you drunk faster than a 750 of wine. That is true. But if you simply explain to people that you don't drink vodka in a large wine glass like you drink wine, you drink an ounce or an ounce and a half mixed with whatever, or done as a shot if you must. I think it's so infantilizing to believe that consumers don't know the difference between a drink of a 40% ABV spirit and a 14% ABV wine. I think that's stupid. Of course we know. Mm-hmm. We can feel ourselves getting drunk if we have too much vodka or whiskey, if you fill a wine glass with whiskey, you're going to be in a rough place, but that's not how people drink it. And they're not going to start drinking it if we allow them to have it delivered by FedEx to their front door.
Yeah. It's also so interesting. We spend all this time saying, will anybody think of the children? And now there are rumblings that Gen Z isn't a generation of drinkers, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you think there's truth to that? I couldn't even tell you who Gen Z are.
Well, they're all under 21, so it makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of them are youngins. Sure. Are they going to have different drinking habits than the generations that come before them? Of course. Millennials drink differently from Gen X, who drinks differently from boomers. Is Gen Z going to drink less? Maybe. Should the industry panic about that? Absolutely not. It's demographic changes. And what do? You look at what those changes are and you figure out how you can respond to that in a way that's responsible. And maybe it means making a little less money for 10 years. Or maybe you're changing what you make and what you offer. Remember,
whiskey.
Gen Z is also smoking a lot more marijuana than, at least legally, openly, right? Legally than previous generations. Yep. They have other options. I think it's great. I think that, different options are a positive thing because not everybody is the same, but we should hope that everybody can find enjoyment in the substance of their choice, the legal substance of their choice. But B, without the changes sparked by changing tastes, changing demographics, what is the industry going to do? They're just going to keep doing the same old thing. And eventually, sometimes that's good. I don't want Glenn Farkless ever to change. I don't want Springbank ever to change. But other times it's like, well, I wouldn't mind seeing Jack Daniels raise their proof back up to 43%, where it used to be. I don't think we should fear those changes. We just have to ask ourselves, what do we value now and what do we want to preserve and how do we go about that?
Yep. Well, we also know the booze industry is spending billions in marijuana. We know
yes.
Those wholesalers that you were mentioning earlier are spending billions on marijuana and cannabis.
Absolutely.
Right? Like they're seeing that changing market happening right before their eyes and making sure they get a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beauty.
All right.
Well,
on that bombshell.
Yeah, it's usually we end our conversations with what are you looking forward to, and I mean, granted, we've dipped in and out of that for the entire conversation. So, Susannah, thank you so much for your time. If you're okay with it, I would love to make this a tradition. Let's take a look every new year. Let's take a look at what the next year is going to present. It's a nice way to start the new year with Susannah Skiver Barton.
I would love that. Let's pencil it in for 2024.
I will be there.
Done.
Absolutely.
Beauty.
Cheers, Susannah.
Well,
Cheers.
Thank you guys so much for asking me to join you and letting me pontificate. I always enjoy telling people what I think, even if I'm dead wrong. So,
well, next January we'll be looking back on what you suggested
please,
for 23. So
humble me. That would be great.
well, have a great year, Susannah. We'll see you.
Same to you guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks again ever so much to Susannah Skiver Barton. Susannah, it really is an honor to not just have you on the podcast, but to call you a friend. And we look forward to connecting with you again this time of year come 2024, when we get to look at the 2024 year in preview. That's going to be exciting.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think holding feet to the fire, right? What did happen in Scotch? What did happen with bourbon? What did happen with store picks? What did happen with the world of American single malt? What have we seen with distilleries in various countries? Yeah, I think that's going to be really exciting to come back and say, what did it all look like? I would implore our listeners to check out Susannah's website.
Yes.
Where they can follow along with her writings as they are coming out. She is SusannahSkiverBarton.com. You can find the spellings of all of those on the masthead and the start of the interview. You will see how many N's are in Susannah. You will see Skiver has no repeating letters in it. It's very exciting. Very, very exciting. She did also tell us once we were off the record that there will be a whiskey course coming from Susannah Skiver Barton.
Yep.
And when we receive more information about that, we will pass that along. It will also be found at SusannahSkiverBarton.com. And our listeners can follow Susannah there. I'll also say you can find her Instagram and Twitter at What Tastes Good.
Yes.
And if you're in those social media places, she is well worth a follow.
God, you two like your Twitters. It's not my bag, man.
I haven't been on Twitter for, 9 months now.
Oh, look at you.
Oh, yeah, I canceled that a long time ago.
Wow, I thought that was your one place where you found social media refuge.
No, it was the one place I would dip into social media. I liked following politics on Twitter. I thought it was a pretty instantaneous report of what was happening in politics.
Yeah.
And then as I was there, I would get some tangential whiskey stuff. But I decided to find much better places to follow long form politics and not short form.
Smart.
However, I would often find pundits and analysts who you could then follow the link through to their stuff from Twitter. But I'm sure listeners will be able to do the very same thing with Susannah through What Tastes Good and track her down and follow along. She's, as you and I have said, she is excellent. Actually, she says here, this is on the top of her website. I'm currently working on a 12-part video series on the history of whiskey for Wondrium, set for release in 2024.
There you go.
So there you go.
Exciting.
She's got it in the first paragraph.
Super exciting stuff. We've got a bit of news that we need to share with our listeners. So I'm going to bring in the paper boy so we can do this properly.
Okay. Okie dokie. See you on the other side.
Break on through to the other side. Break on through. Break.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra! Read all about it. Me and that
You and I and Jess worked hard, very hard, to get our U.S. retail release number 9 here to the States so that it would arrive in time to start hitting store shelves so that people can purchase them and have them with their Christmas and Hanukkah celebrations and New Year's celebrations. But unfortunately, the world was against us. We couldn't get the proper shipping in place. We couldn't get the containers. We had holiday delays, you name it. The world was against us. However, it is a new year, Jason. It is 2023. And in this new year, I'm happy to say our whiskey retail release number 9 is finally here. Ready to be on store shelves. And I feel as if maybe the last episode, not the year in review episode, but the one prior to that, we shared some of the details of that release with our 34-year-old Invergordon from a refill sherry butt in there. There's a 7-year-old Kalila that's 2 refill bourbon barrels married together. There's an Inchgower 10-year-old that's 1 sherry Hoggy, 1 bourbon Hoggy married together. Then we have a rum, a Guatemalan rum from the Darsa Distillery. And that's from a first fill bourbon barrel. And I think that one's 10 years. Maybe it's 11 years. I think it's a 10-year-old. And then finally, it's our Wolf Island Take 2 bottling. Now, that's retail. That's a retail release. Now,
Indeed it is.
we have something that we're going to be doing really soon. And that's going to be on singlecastnation.com. So this is for our American or U.S.-based members or our members who have a U.S.-based address that they can have bottles shipped to. We're doing something that's called the Celebration of the Nation.
That is it.
And there are going to be some really interesting deals and opportunities for bottlings that are on our website. We've never really done anything like this before, and it's kind of exciting to be putting this into place. And so keep your eyes peeled. Where should they be looking, Jason?
Definitely the private members only Facebook group. Okay, can I say something real quick about that group? And it's from something you told me last week.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's on Facebook. More and more people are moving away from Facebook. And one of the things you said to me the other day was, we just had our first spam bots, spam attacks, spam bullshit in the group.
Bullshit, that's the proper term. Yep.
Right? And member Dan Gryson called attention to it. You went in, dismissed it immediately, banned the person attached to it.
100%.
And you'd even said to me, that person answered the 4 distinct questions to get into that group and still delivered spam. But the reason I bring this up is we're so focused on that being a haven. I say that because you're very close to New Haven, Joshua.
There we go.
There we go. Haven in Facebook that members who sign up for that and participate in that can know that it's not going to devolve. One of the questions, one of the agreements in joining it is you will not be an asshole in that group. If you're deemed to be an asshole, you're jettisoned
Gone.
from that group.
Instantly. One strike and you're out.
Done.
Yep.
So it's a good spot. It is a good spot to hang out, have whiskey-related chat with like-minded people, and you do a good job curating that, Joshua. So definitely the private members only Facebook group will deliver information. I'm sure our Instagram will deliver information along the way there. And of course we will email. So make sure info@singlecastnation.com is in your address book to try and limit the number of emails that make it to your junk folder, your spam folder. We can't fight it on our end. We can do our best. We make sure we don't do spammy subjects. We make sure we don't do spammy preview text. We try to make sure that the content is worthy of making it through a filter, a spam filter. Sometimes we just get batched into the spam folder. So keep a listen there. And we really do. We want to put some things back to the nation that will serve as celebration. We've talked for years about getting bottles onto the website so you can make regular purchases there. Now we can actually take advantage of that availability to have some fun, celebrate the nation.
Super exciting stuff to be putting out for our nation members. Speaking of exciting things, and speaking of social media, you mentioned this before, right? More and more people are getting away from Facebook. They're getting away, and they're looking at different social media platforms. And one of the things that we had found almost from the beginning of this podcast is people would say, when are you going to get your podcast up on YouTube? And
which is surprising to me, because I've seen both of our faces. And I think we both have faces for audio. And yet, people who we're standing in front of are asking about video.
They're asking for video. And you know what? There's a lot of great YouTube whiskey content on there, and that's where people look for certain content.
Yeah.
And so for the past 7 years, you've been asking, and we're finally going to deliver. We are taking our extra It's All About Whiskey podcast, and we're pulling it. Pulling it makes it sound negative. We're migrating that podcast from the audio space to YouTube. So we're going to have a tight 35, air quotes around that.
Now people can see our air quotes around tight 35.
To YouTube, and that's really exciting. Do you want to delve a little deeper into that, Jason?
Yeah, you know this, and I've made it clear in today's episode. I don't like celebrations. I don't like fun. I don't like change. I am so excited. I'm so excited for this move to YouTube. I really am, and for me, it's the community, right? And I think there's a certain romance and enjoyment to being disembodied voices who receive disembodied communications from the people who listen to our disembodied voices, right? We put an audio podcast out into the world, we get emails back. And then when we're out and about in the world, we get to meet some of these people and they get to see us face to face, and it's really wonderful. And One Nation Under Whiskey will remain in that format. Having extra go to YouTube, and every couple of weeks for that podcast, you'll get to see our faces, you'll get to see us rolling our eyes at one another, you'll get to see the air quotes around tight 35. To me, it's the beginning of an embodied communication, right? Where you get to see us as you're hearing us. And one of the things we're moving towards, and we have discussed in pre-production, off air for a change, is the move to YouTube giving us the opportunity to drop the occasional, maybe they'll become more frequent, who knows what that future will hold, but we'll have a chance to be live and in person in certain instances with our listeners who have supported us on Extra Extra into a 4th season and on One Nation Under Whiskey through 6 full, and we will begin our 7th
There you go.
in a month. Wild numbers, wild numbers. But on top of that, even using YouTube a little more than just the podcast experience as well.
Yep.
You know, for a number of years, we've been putting tasting videos up there for the nation. We have a single Cask Nation channel that we have been populating. Maybe the time has come to populate that a little more, Joshua.
I think so. And maybe change our YouTube name to J&J Spirits, seeing as it's now a single Cask Nation and One Nation Under Whiskey and God knows what else. Yeah, I'm excited for this because I enjoy YouTube and I enjoy YouTube content, and I like being able to make a comment during a live. Like, I love the idea of doing live events and being able to communicate with the people who are doing them live. So, yeah, it's going to be a fun space.
And we'll say more about this when the time comes. But just to show kind of a slight change in format as well, we will have the presentation of a pertinent whiskey news story in the first half. We'll have riffing in the second half, but we're also adding in a new releases component that won't be all the new releases of the day, but we're looking for ways and reasons to talk more whiskey. And returning to that Whiskey Advocate top 20 of 22 list, where we were looking at it like, who's that and what's that and who put that out? We want to be more informed, and we want to help better inform the listeners of Extra Extra as well.
Yeah.
So I'm excited, and for our very dear Jess, when we hold up a whiskey, we'll be able to share the colour of it on YouTube.
That's right, yeah. Explaining the whiskey. What is the color? Well, now you get to see it. Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of our very dear Jess, and to bring our news segment full circle before we close it, you rightly pointed out, Joshua, that you and I worked diligently to get that 9th release into the United States before the close of OND and one thing led to another. We couldn't work hard on that without Jess, boots on the ground in Scotland, working hard on that. And boy, did she do everything in her power to get it moving as well. So
yeah,
kudos to her as well.
When I said we, I mean, I really meant Jess. I mean...
Right? 100%. And I know that. I know that. For listeners,
yeah,
we means Jess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Where would we be without our dear Jess?
But I tell you, and again, just to complete that circle, which, you know, listeners know Jason doesn't like, is to say how different to be sitting at the beginning of 2023 and saying, we have a retail release in this country that is working its way to stores, as opposed to 22, when we were looking at what are the next steps, what's glass looking like, what's labels looking like, what's global shipping looking like. I'm not saying those problems have gone away. We just dealt with them at the tail end of last year.
Yeah.
And here we are starting a year stronger than we did last year. That is worth celebrating. If only we had something to pour, Joshua.
Well, maybe a little blind barrel celebration.
Go on.
I think the final remaining, is that sample C?
It is not.
Is it sample?
And I know exactly which letter it is because I just pulled it out of my box. So I know exactly. I'll give you a clue.
Yeah.
It's the letter that starts Deanston.
So it's sample D, and here's the interesting thing about sample D, Jason, which you may not remember. I forgot But I told Seabass about this a while back.
Oh no!
It came. This sample was a bit leaky, so I have maybe a tenth of what's in there. And so, how about Jason? I'll pour what I have, but why don't I do the reading and you do the guessing, seeing as you have the majority of the liquid to work from?
Yeah, I got mine's full. Yep, I just cracked the seal on a full sample bottle.
Yeah.
Oh wow, I completely forgot you'd lost that content.
What would you say? There's maybe a tenth left?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're way down there.
Yeah.
Bummer, dude.
All right. So Jason has poured his sample, and I've poured what remains. Okay. I've got ideas already.
Yeah, me too. Like immediately my nose thought American. And as I put my nose back into it, I'm getting a lot of fruit.
Okay. So this is sample number D. Why don't you go ahead and describe the color for people?
You and your numbers and Ds. It always gets me. Number D. Did
I say number D?
You did. It's not the first time, not the last time.
Oh my gosh.
It is a delicious, bright, warm gold leaning into amber.
Okay. And
I have got a beautiful, bright January day in my garden office here.
So what? Oh, okay. I thought your notes, your nasal notes, was a beautiful, bright January day. Color. Okay.
No, It's reflecting as I hold it up to the window. My previous office was a darker space, literally and figuratively, than the current space I have. And so I am thoroughly enjoying how bright things are. I'm also fixing my mic cable while I'm saying all this, which in the new Extra, people will see me fixing my mic cable.
Oh, that's right. All right, so give it a nose. Give us some notes. And
so here's my problem, Joshua.
Go ahead.
My and I think this is it's worth talking about this because it reflects the challenge of blind tasting. Is my nose immediately said American, and the first whiff of it I had instantly confirmed American grain whiskey. And as I return to this, I'm trying to get my brain to turn off American light whiskey, American grain whiskey, and be open to other things in here.
Interesting.
And my brain keeps slamming the door on that. It's like, nope, you're getting orange gumdrops. Yep, you get a bit of the spice from the gumdrops in there. You know that fruit you're getting? It's oranges, and it's big orange peel. And I'm like, brain, you need to stop doing this. We got to be more open in a blind tasting.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. That really does seem to be home base for you when you don't know and you find the single signpost, like it's got to be this.
Yeah. Because, and it's confirmation bias, right? It's an initial conclusion that needs to be deconstructed and unpacked. I will say, though, the best I can get my brain to do is open the doors beyond light whiskey. I still think we're playing in the American sandbox.
Do you want me to read? There's a part that I could read here, the Seabass's Our Take part, that I feel as if I can read that and omit a few items that might help you. You want me to do that?
I just got a hard water component, that industrial window putty kind of component. I gave it a little shake and I got some on my hands to rub on my hands. I also used the double shake to see that signs are pointing to cask strength on it.
So here's one thing that I could tell you. There's a note on here that I smelled immediately, and I know it. Anywhere I find it, I know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those telltale notes that helps me. Like for you, if you smell orange gumdrops, you say, okay, it's got to be light whiskey. It's going to be in that realm. And you're not always correct. When I smell...
I'm often incorrect.
You're often incorrect. When I get this note and it takes me to where my brain lets it be taken to, I would argue I'm more correct when I find this note, and I find it in this bottling.
And do they announce it in there?
They do. Yeah, I was
Okay.
on. Yep.
Well, if you and I were tasting this blind and you had all the liquid, if you got the note, tell me the note.
So it's a note that I have difficult describing, but I always attribute it to a very, very specific thing. And if I tell you what that very, very specific thing is, that might either help this overall or it might ruin it overall.
Just go ahead. Because if you were nosing this, you would have said this word or you would have described this out loud.
Okay.
I just have the benefit of the preamble now. So give me the note as you experienced it. I will say the oils on the side of this glass are remarkable.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful.
So, like you, the initial nose, I said, okay, this is not single malt Scotch whiskey, right? This doesn't seem like a type of like malted barley product. Mm-hmm. But I got malted rye on the nose, which is something that I typically do not like.
So the reason I wanted you to say that out loud is because I think in Scotland, hard water note that leads me to the industrial, the window putty, is a potential note on some malted rye. When I know I'm not in the Scotch sandbox. Now, of course, if we're talking malted rye, we might not necessarily be in America here. There are malted ryes being made in other parts of the world.
That there is, right? Our backwoods is a perfect example of a rye whiskey that uses malted rye in the mash bill. Our Australian backwoods, our Yakandanda backwoods.
Yeah. This isn't the Dutch outfit, is it?
Well, let's hear some notes.
My brain's trying to get some square 90-degree angles again. What can we start to box in here?
So give it a taste. See if you can get us some notes from the taste. And let us know, too, if the tasting of this whiskey modifies the nosing of this whiskey.
It's thinner on entry than the oils in the glass would suggest. I thought it was going to be really unctuous coming in the door. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit thinner than expected. The flavors, I'm still getting the fruit from the nose. I don't know if I want to start talking about brown cereal to the back of the palate, but there's something darker, heavier, wood, dust, char. There's something to the back of the palate. I'm also curious about the strength of it because the bubbles are telling one story and the palate is telling another.
Okay. So what are the
I would put the strength somewhere around 54, 56.
And palate, what would the palate say? Higher or lower?
I would put it somewhere in the 40s coming across the palate.
Okay. Do you want me to give you the ABV?
Yeah, it gives a strength, yeah.
Because I think if you took your palate ABV, added it to the bubble ABV and divided it by 2, you may come to what the actual ABV is. So it's 52.5%.
Okay. Yeah, it just doesn't hit the palate like that at all.
No, it doesn't. It comes off softer for me, and I get the fruitiness that you're talking about, but it's almost like a candied fruitiness mixed with like a plasticine, like something very artificial almost coming through across the palate.
The industrial builds on the palate.
Yeah, it really does.
Almost like solvent, which I know somebody could take as a very serious negative. I'm not necessarily saying it as a positive, but it's not like I'm, throwing it out of my glass.
Well, I mean,
I'm not getting a lot on the palate. As you're tasting the small quantity you've got, are you getting much from it on the palate?
I think my glass would have benefited from having a full sample bottle. I think the oxidation over a year's period, where there's a tenth of the bottle left in it, it's making for a very thin, worse than insipid experience for me.
Yeah, it's definitely not there. I'll say that out loud. It's definitely not there. But there's less to the palate. Like, it comes out strong with the nose, real promising. Light to the front of the palate, gets a little heavier towards the back of the palate, short finish.
Definitely short finish. I would say that the palate comes across as if it's 43%. And potentially even chill filtered, right? There seems to be a thinness to the texture despite the oils that you're talking about on the glass.
And that's the thing. The glass is telling a completely different story.
Yeah.
The oil in the glass is not suggesting any of that for the palate. So let's hear their paragraph. What's their paragraph?
Do you want to hear their tasting notes first?
Oh, I thought that's what their paragraph was going to be. So their kind of summation.
You've got their tasting notes and then their overall take.
Yeah, let's participate with them. Let's hear their tasting notes.
Okay.
And I'm nosing and tasting along with them.
So aroma, clove, herbal wintergreen, spicy vanilla, rye bread, black pepper, honeyed apple.
What was that last part about apple?
Honeyed apple, which I
honeyed.
Yeah, I can
honestly,
see that.
I thought you'd said uneaten apple. Honeyed apple.
Do you know that note of uneaten apple?
Like, it's when it sits on your counter and just like starts to wrinkle over the course of weeks. And you're like, it's gone too far, but I can't compost it yet. Like, it's gonna grow mold before I can compost it.
Taste.
All right, I think we've been simpatico along a lot of these tasting notes. I wish I was getting the exuberance that they were getting on the nose.
Well, I tell you, the rye bread note, I wouldn't call it, for me, I wouldn't call it like an Arnold's rye bread, but rather that super thin, moist, sprouted rye German bread I would get on the nose. That's a very different proposition.
I'm glad I went with the spiced gumdrop earlier because it allows me to lean on some of the spice that's happening in here on the nose. So okay. I feel at one with that. All right, onto this palate. 52.5.
It's four things. Are you ready? Spicy grain, a hint of dill, caraway seed, and spearmint.
Yeah, you and I have talked for years that I've always wanted to be able to get mint on noses and palates, and I don't often get it. I sometimes get a little bit of eucalyptus, and that makes me happy. The spearmint on the palate, the power of suggestion is strong with that one. I've got a freshness happening now since they've said it.
You want the finish?
Yeah, quick, because it's not going to be around for long.
Floral rose, nutmeg, unripe mango, and a touch of oak. Mm-hmm. So do you have any guesses at this point?
52.5. I'm having this moment of cognitive dissonance between the bubbles, the oil in the glass, the much softer entry, and the quick finish. It's not adding up for me. It's not telling a single consistent story.
All right, let me...
I to be honest with you, I wouldn't want to guess names on this.
You wouldn't. You listen, there's no way you could guess this. There's no way I would ever guess this.
That takes me right off the hook. Right off the hook.
So the distillery, it's unknown. The bottler is Proof and Wood Ventures. So this is our friend Dave Schmier.
Mm-hmm.
The distillery is unknown, presumed to be Kozuba and Sons Distillery. And the name of the bottling is simply called The Stranger.
I should have been holding it in my left hand. I made a mistake.
And it's The Stranger Polish whiskey. So this is 100% Polish malted rye, 7 years of age, 52.5% alcohol. And on the label, it says this rye was distilled from 100% rye in Poland and aged in the USA in ex-bourbon and ex-rye barrels. And it's a batch of 10 barrels. And so this is the Blind Barrel's our take on the whiskey. So before I read that, would you have guessed a Polish malted rye?
No, I would have no way to guess Polish. The name of this game is not to like or dislike the whiskey, but to play the blind game of what are the clues, where are the clues leading us. I'm going to go down the path of saying out loud that I didn't necessarily like this whiskey.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy it.
But I'm really happy that I can add some knowledge of Polish malted rye to my lexicon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that to me is the purpose of either playing this game or, talking with Seabass and Blind Barrels. They have curated a selection in this pack that I would not have known about otherwise.
Yeah.
And even if I didn't even if I wouldn't go out and buy a bottle of this, they're on my radar now. Mm-hmm. I'm going to recognize the name going forward. I'm going to think about Polish rye going forward. I'm going to think about our Polish friend John Kay and say, hey, John, have you tried, this undisclosed Polish distillery? Have you tried that? Do you know anything about that? It's a conversation starter. Yeah. And I think that is worth plenty, absolute plenty. So, we're not here to like or dislike a whiskey, but we are here to learn, and I have learned this day.
I enjoyed tasting it by itself, simply for a reference, because I have had Polish rye before, but it's been in the form of it being blended into a larger barrel bourbon bottling. And right, and being able to taste this by itself will help me to sort of contextualize that portion of the blend. Like, what are the flavors of the Polish malted rye doing to this larger barrel bourbon bottling, right? And it's nice to kind of know the origins of that and see what that whiskey can do in conjunction to other ones. So I liked it from that perspective. Yeah.
100%. So, I actually just spilled some on my desk making a second pour of it.
There you go. So this is their take. It says, let's see how you can handle the curve. And then in parentheses, it says, sports ball reference, Joshua. It says, I admit to being slightly biased by my Polish heritage. And this comes from Seabass. Christopher Sebastian. But this experiment greatly intrigued me with regards to terroir, old world grains, and the freedom to use a variety of casks in aging. Add to that the story of the presumed distillery moving their operation from Poland to America to pursue a market that is thirsty for craft spirits, and you've got a fun combination. Don't be, quote, the stranger to bold strokes. There you go.
Yeah.
I like that. I didn't know
He's
that.
right, yeah.
I didn't know that part of the story where this distillery sort of took their operation. They're moving it to the U.S. to do rye in the U.S. I think that's kind of cool.
It's interesting that it's released as an undisclosed with a presumed to be attached to it.
Yeah, that I don't know. Yeah. But
that's the hoop jumping that we often get to do. I like this release enough to put it out. I have to do what with this story? Okay, I do like this though. Yeah. Definite learning experience today. I'm kind of intrigued by that solventy nature of it. I've kind of retraced my steps here.
Well, I'll tell you the solventy aspect to it, while these notes don't apply, it makes me think of some of the older Jefferson's bottlings, like from 10 years ago, the old 18-year when I think that was Stitzel Weller liquid. And there was this model glue note that if you focus on it just being model glue, you're like, is that okay? But with everything else, it was this bright, sweet character that really helped the whole experience. So like a solventy quality can be a nice quality if it's a part and parcel to the many other things going on.
Yeah. I'm just staring at it in my glass like, holy shit, I've just taken a journey with this blind sample D. Sincere thanks to Seabass, Christopher Sebastian, for putting together a pack just for us on One Nation Under Whiskey, with notes, with, backstory. He put in a lot of work, and we are continuing our collaboration with Blind Barrels in 2023. I'm excited to see what the next pack is. Okay. For anybody who's kind of joining us and wondering what the hell we're talking about, Blind Barrels can be found at blindbarrels.com. They will curate a selection of blind samples for you, send them to your doorstep with information, and you can do what we've done today, is take a journey, learn something new, revisit perhaps an old favorite in a new guise. And to be clear, Blind Barrels do not send us packs that are in circulation, so as to avoid us revealing spoilers, which we're good stand-up chaps. We're not in the business of revealing spoilers, but if you listen to this before getting your pack, we may inadvertently do so. So we have our own curated pack for One Nation Under Whiskey, which I love and I appreciate.
That's pretty special.
It's a very, very nice gesture from old Seabass over in California.
Don't have time for any mail. But with that said, rather than read a piece of mail that may have come in, I'd like to urge our listeners to send in some new mail, because we are preparing for our annual mailbag episode, which is the final episode of each season. Now, in seasons past, people would send us questions either about the industry, about bottlings, about ourselves, about anything. They had questions, we would answer them. And this time around, we're going to be recording that mailbag episode along with our dear Jess and Elijah while we're all together in Seattle in February. And so
looking forward to that.
Yeah, right. So if you've got questions for us, send them in. If you've got questions for Elijah or Jess, send them in. If you have questions that you want Elijah or Jess to ask us, send them in. Whatever it is, I think bringing these two in kind of adds a wrinkle to the established fun time that we have. That might just make the whole experience that much more fun.
Yeah, we're all about fun, collaboration, chitty chatties. We'll all be in Seattle together. I think this will be the first time the four of us are together as a singular workforce.
As a singular company. Amazing. Fucking amazing.
That is remarkable to consider.
It's wild. So, if you have a question for us, send it in to questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com, no E in whiskey, or info@singlecasknation.com. You can send it in that way. And we will bring them all together. We'll read them on air. We'll answer them on air. And I'm really looking forward to it. I know we talk about the year in review being a fun episode to record, but I like the mailbag episode because it's really, because we're not doing live YouTube events all the time. This is the closest to some interaction we get to our listeners. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, we could pick every episode as our favorite. We could pick every SCN release of the year as our favorite, right?
Yeah.
These are wonderful, wonderful aspects of what we do. And communicating with our listeners is another wonderful, wonderful aspect of what it is, what we do.
That we do.
And we will see everybody on the YouTubes for the next extra episode.
And what's the date on that, Jason?
Wednesday, January 18.
Beauty. And on that note, Jason, I doth raise my glass to you and to our listeners and to Christopher Sebastian and the folks at Blind Barrel and to Susannah, Skiver, Barton.
Indeed. Cheers and a happy 2023 for all.
Cheers.
Year in preview.
So this,
are we putting music anywhere in around here?
Yeah, maybe a little Cool in the Gang, a little celebrate good time, come on, boom, boom, boom.
I was just thinking, don't you have interstitials?
What's that?
You have interstitials to get us out of news and into the next segment?
I had a case of interstitials, but there was a cream for it.
I had a flock of seagulls. You ever seen that? Again, back to the scatological humor. When you go to the toilet and you have a flock of seagulls, it's when you only shit on the bowl and there's nothing in the water.
Uh-huh.